Hi, this is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast. Today I have with me Gloria Rand, who I met through Women's Prosperity Network, one of the online networking groups that I'm involved with. I brought Gloria on the show because of her deep knowledge about one of the things that makes a huge difference for you in terms of your website traffic. She is an award-winning SEO blogger, and we'll talk about what SEO stands for if it's a term that you don't know. And she is internationally known as a leading expert in internet marketing, as well as she's the owner of Web to Wealth Marketing. Gloria, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Pat, for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are right now.
Well, it's an interesting journey, as we all sort of take, bumps and roads and things. But, a lot of what happened, I think why I do what I do stems from actually how I grew up, which was not the most ideal circumstances. I had an alcoholic father and an abusive mother. So I learned at an early age it was better to be seen and not heard. And as a result of that, I think it's what drew me into writing, because I do believe that God had a plan for me and that I needed to express my voice some way. And so at the beginning, it was through writing. And eventually, I also got interested in the creative arts. I've always been into music and dance and things like that. So when I wound up getting into college, I wound up majoring in mass communications and in particular, television production. And after graduating, I was thrilled to get a job with the Nightly Business Report. When it was on public television, it was a national business news program. And not knowing at the time that it would actually really serve me well in my business today, because I had to learn how to distill complex economic subjects into short 30-second bites. And now when I write copy online for business owners, you probably know as well as I do that people have extremely short attention spans these days. So you've got to be able to grab someone's attention right away when they go to a website. So that's sort of how I wound up here, right? Because I actually wound up, I lost my job during the last recession that we had. And so I had to reinvent myself. And that's how I wound up getting into copywriting.
Copywriting affects us in so many ways when we are business owners, being able to capture the attention of our ideal reader and repel the non-ideal client for us. Mm-hmm. So that is a skill that when you have that developed is so effective in marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you've got to be able to communicate with who you want to reach. And so they've got to be able to when they get to your website, to be able to see that you've got the answer to their particular problem, that they can see it right away. And I love doing, well, we'll get to it a little bit probably later, but why especially SEO appeals to me. It's sort of appeals to my left and right brain sides.
Well, first of all, let's define SEO for people who are not familiar with that term.
Yeah, absolutely. SEO stands for search engine optimization. And so when I initially learned how to do copywriting, I was learning how to write junk mail that comes in the real regular, that the post office delivers to you mail. And then I learned that online was where everything was going. And so search engine optimization, SEO copywriting, is a way to be able to then help your website to show up by coming up with the particular terms and phrases that people are using when they search online, when they go to Google, for instance, and they type in, I'm looking for a nurse practitioner, I'm looking for legal assistance, I'm looking for a florist, whatever it is. If your website has that information on it that answers that question, that's going to help you to then show up in that search result, and people will be able to go visit your website.
I know that in the past, some people have misused the system and deliberately put in what's called keyword stuffing
Right.
to try to attract the search engines. Can you tell us a little bit about the balance of how many times we should be putting legal nurse consultant on our website so that it's not verging into being overdone?
Sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because yeah, keyword stuffing in the olden days, it's like, really, I mean, even going back 10 years ago, I think there were probably still some people that would do that, but that's not what Google wants. And what we mean by, yeah, it would be to say, like, legal nurse consultant 10 times on a page. And that's not going to help you. In fact, Google doesn't want to see that, frankly, anymore, because Google wants you to write content that is for the reader, for the user of your website. And so think about it as if you were having a conversation with someone that you would meet in real life or over Zoom right now. You wouldn't probably say legal nurse consultant 10 times in your conversation. Instead, you'd be talking about what you do and how you can help your clients. So that's what your website should have on there as well. It needs to have that type of content, not so much worrying about the phrase. And that's the other thing too, is back even, probably 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when there were a lot fewer websites to begin with, number one, so there's a lot more competition, but you could get away with that. But now people have gotten very savvy about how they're searching, for one thing, and number two, they're searching by using their phone, and they're talking into Google. So they're asking questions, they're being more specific, and that's why then the content you need to have on your website should reflect that. It needs to answer those types of questions, so that it will then show up. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It does. And you did bring up a great point. That the fact is that many more people are accessing websites now on their phone than they do on their computer.
Right.
So if your website is not set up to be responsive or to reshape and reformat itself to fit on the phone, then people will get frustrated because they have to push the image to the side and
yes.
and it just doesn't work. And a mark of an older website is one that doesn't recreate itself that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I still come across those every once in a while. And it is very annoying, especially because I've got a really small, old iPhone. So I have to pinch and do all these crazy things to be able to read it and turn it. And it's like, it makes me crazy. So, I mean, if it's not something I really need, then I am just going to go back and find a different site to go to. So you don't want your clients to do that. You want people to be able to see your content easily.
Are there any misconceptions about SEO that you run into?
There's definitely a few, but I would say probably the biggest one that people still even have today is that they think that SEO is a one and done deal. That, okay, I've optimized it, I've figured out what keyword phrases people are using, and I've got my website set up, everything is the way it's supposed to be, and then I can just set it and forget it. And, wait for people, it's like build it and they will come, the old Field of Dreams analogy. It's like, not quite. It's definitely something that you need to pay attention to every so often. You don't want to necessarily feel like you have to spend every day to it, but probably at least once a quarter, it might be a good idea to look at your analytics, which if you don't know how to do that, you can talk to your webmaster, because Google offers free analytics. It just requires putting some code in the back end of your website. And then you can go and see what pages are getting the most traffic, what pages are not, and which pages are, people are just leaving right away as soon as they go there. And if those are important pages that you want people to stay, then it might be time to freshen up the content again. And one thing I recommend to people is to get somebody else to look at your website, maybe somebody who's not even in your field at all, and just have them look at it and see if they can understand your points that you're trying to make. Because a lot of times if you're trying to write your own content for your website, you get so into your own little world that you don't see things that other people who maybe aren't as familiar with certain terms, for instance, they might get confused about. So that's one piece of advice that I would give someone to do.
One of my colleagues just looked at my Iyer.com website and pointed out some things that were blindingly obvious to her and not so obvious to me. And that was valuable feedback. It's going to lead me to make some changes in the homepage and the way that the site is laid out.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that name of that book? The guy who wrote the book, his first name is Steve, but it's called Don't Make Me Think. And it's about watching people go through your website. Where did they go first? How did they travel? Where did they confuse? What's the stumbling block?
Right.
His book is probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years old. I think his last name was Krug, Krug. I will put it in the show notes and correct the transcript of this show. But the principles are the same.
Yeah.
The technology has changed, but are we communicating with our readers? Are we attracting their attention? Is it easy to navigate? Is it intuitive? Or do they hit dead ends? Do they encounter stumbling blocks?
Right.
And then what do you need to do to your website to respond to what people are falling into in the way of traps?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know that we've talked about some of the misconceptions, but what are some of the obstacles that our listeners might be encountering in their own design and maintenance of their own websites?
Well, I would say one of the big things, well, actually probably two things. I would say number one is actually focusing too much on the design of the website and not the message. And that's definitely something that I've come across in the past where, you've taken so much time in wanting to make the site look really good, but you've fallen down and on a message. And for instance, I was looking through some websites actually about some legal nurse practitioners, and this website had a really good message. It had a good headline, but they had the words on top of an image, and then it was hard to read the actual words. I had to really study it, and I was like, why? Again, like you just said, it's like sometimes you don't see things, you don't see the forest for the trees. You're used to it, but I think a lot of times people just get so caught up in making things look good, they forget about the message. And sometimes that winds up being an issue for even the way your website can be found. Because sometimes if you have too many images on the site, or they're too big, I should say, they're too large, and that can actually slow down your website loading. And then again, like we said, people don't like to wait. And if your website is taking 5 seconds, 10 seconds to even just load up for someone to see, they've probably already said, forget it. And they've hit the back button on their computer or their phone or whatever, and they're going to find somebody else. So it's important to keep track of those things, because also that is one of the factors that Google will rank sites for is page speed, the speed of your website. So again, that's something that gets into more technical stuff, things I don't deal with, but that's where your web designer can certainly help you out and do things to be able to improve your site speed.
And there's a process by which a website gets larger and larger and larger and creeps up and creeps up and creeps up. I have over 600 blogs on my website and probably another 500 pages on Legal Nurse Business. And until we were paying attention to the size of the images, what we didn't realize was that we were slowly strangling the site in terms of the loading speed.
Right.
There is a plugin that my webmaster put on that helps to smush the images. I think it's called WP Smush.
Mm.
And we can click on it when I load a blog. I click on the images, I make them smaller.
Mm.
It is something that you really have to pay attention to, but if you are maintaining your own website and you only have, as most of our listeners do, they probably have much smaller websites than mine. Mine is the big mothership.
Yes.
But if you pay attention to it right from the beginning as you add to your website, then you don't run into the risk of it being brought to its knees by lots and lots and lots of big images, because it's a hard problem to fix once you have inflicted it upon yourself.
That's true.
Tell me about SEO copywriting and its importance. And I know you've touched a little bit on it in terms of writing about your benefits and services, but is there anything else that you can share with us about why this is so important and we should be thinking about the wording on our website in much more detail than maybe we have been?
Well, again, it really comes down to focusing on what's important for your client. What are the real benefits that they're going to get from your service? Because again, I've been looking at different websites and checking in different areas, and a lot of people, a lot of legal nurse practitioners, on their homepage, they're touting their qualifications, which is important. But for me, if I wanted to hire someone, and it can be in any profession, what I want to know is, what are you doing for me? What's in it for me? That's where it boils down to. Are you going to save me time? Are you going to save me money? Are you going to save my clients time or money? That's what I want to see. And for instance, I was looking at the back end of a website, and part of what SEO copywriting does, not only does it focus in on the content on the page, but we also do some work behind the scenes and too. There's things called a title tag and a description tag, and that is what, when Google crawls through your website, they look for that information, and if it matches the query that someone has put into Google, looking for your site, if it has those phrases in there, then that Google will actually display that information then on the search engine results page. So I found one that had a great description. It said, "We help attorneys promote faster settlement for their clients." And I was like, wow, that's really great. Did it say that on the homepage? No. And I was like, that's like the perfect headline. That would be something that's so clear and to the point, because again, that's what SEO copywriting really is about. It's about focusing in on what is it that you've got to answer that question. Why does someone need you? Why do they need you in particular? What are you going to do for them? And so if you can answer that question so someone sees it right away in like 3 seconds in a simple headline, that's great. Because then you can go on and explain, okay, why hire me versus somebody else? What's my unique background? But that's secondary. It really needs to focus in on what benefit are you giving me, and tangible benefits. So you've got to put yourself in your client's shoes and figure out what their problems are. And if you don't know, then ask someone. The next time someone hires you, ask them, why in particular, or after you're done working with them, why did you hire me? What in particular was it that I did for you? Because that way, then you can even use their terminology on your website.
That's an interesting point, Gloria. This doesn't have to be a difficult process of brainstorming. You can ask your clients how they got results, how their lives are better because they're starting to work with you.
Absolutely.
Let's take the converse approach, which is what you might have discovered when you looked at legal nurse consultants' websites, is that many people have in their training, been given a list of services and told, here's what you should put on your website, that you do this, 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 and this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you figure out the benefits from looking at that list of services?
I guess it would depend. And I think if you can't, then you need to expand on it a little bit and explain, why, what was it, finding expert witnesses, or being able to explain certain medical terminology. What is that going to do for the attorney client, I presume, and being able to present his case? So it's great to list services, but again, it still has to come down to what benefit. And a lot of times, this is a technique that I learned in being able to become a copywriter, is to keep asking yourself, so what? It's like, okay, so you can do XYZ service. Okay, so what? Why is that important? And then just keep and say, okay, well, maybe it saves them time. Okay, well, so what? It saves them some time. What does that mean? Well, then I have more time to focus on some other aspects of my case, or maybe I will actually not have to, I'll have more time to spend with my family, whatever. It just, you have to keep going deeper and deeper into that. So what? Because that's the bottom line. And when you can really get to the heart of why someone needs your service, then that's what you focus on. And then the other stuff is just the gravy. It's like the icing on the cake. And then they'll be, really happy, but you've got to get to the bottom line first.
It's an interesting point for you, because as you were talking, I was thinking about the nurses on this call can probably relate to this technique. And I think it's one of the Japanese quality assurance techniques that are used when there is an error in healthcare. I think it's called the 5 whys. Why did that happen? Well, then why did that happen? Why did that happen?
Right.
And you keep asking that same question over and over until you've gotten down to the real root cause of an incident.
Yeah.
When you talk about saying, well, so what? Well, why is that important? Or another way to ask this is, what's so good about that?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
What's so good about that answer? What's so good about that answer? And you keep going.
Yeah.
As you said, until you've gotten down to what is the real benefit for the attorney?
Mm-hmm.
The benefit for the attorney of having somebody locate expert witnesses might be that the attorney knows that you can speak the same language as the expert. Well, what's so good about that? Well, that means that you can get a qualified person who really understands what the case is about. Well, what's so good about that? Well, that increases the probability of the attorney winning the case if that person is well qualified and understands the case and goes into it with that understanding.
Right.
But what's so good about winning the case? Well, it helps the plaintiff. If the plaintiff is the person who wins, or the insurance carrier and the defense firm, if they win.
Yep.
And you keep going in that manner, but just saying, as you pointed out, one of the examples, I locate expert witnesses, doesn't get into all those layers, the time that you save the attorney. And then from there, all the other points that I just shared.
Right.
But if you looked at all of this, and I appreciate the fact that you looked at LNC websites and got a sense of what kinds of things people are putting on their websites. Did you see a common mistake that you feel legal nurse consultants need to address on their websites?
I think the most common one really was putting too much of their, I would say, either putting too much of their expertise, or just being a little bit too general about the benefits. It really, it's and this goes back to sort of an old journalism term, bearing the lead. I think that's a lot of what is going on, is that there were very few that came right to it and said, we specialize in helping you save time and money, essentially, or something like that. And it was more about, I help you do this, like you said, listing like all of the services that they provide, as opposed to how those services are going to benefit the attorney. So that's, I think, that seemed to be the most common mistake, is to just focusing too much on that and not on their own qualifications, rather on what they can do for the client.
Mm-hmm. And while we're focusing on mistakes, did you see any other mistakes that you could identify that relate to SEO?
I would say the other things are, I touched on briefly a bit of, is not optimizing your title and description tags. And again, this is depending on what platform you're using to build your website. There may be an easy or not so easy way of doing it, but oftentimes there is some sort of, whether it's a WordPress or Wix or whatever other type platform that you're using to build your website. And the title is something that, and I think, actually, I think that was one of the most common mistakes, is the title. I think I saw on a lot of them, especially on the homepage, was just the name of the website. And you can actually include, Google wants you to actually include information that is specific about what the content of that page is. So basically, every website page that you want someone to be able to find, so for instance, your homepage, probably your about page, your services page, those pages should have a customized title and a customized description tag that gives a brief synopsis about what the page is about, because that is going to help your website. Again, if someone uses those phrases, that it will show up in the search result page. And the other one, well, I touched on about the slow loading, with images and things. And then I would say the other one is just quality content, is just making sure that you do have good quality content on your website. And I know some people, I don't think I noticed anybody, I don't know if your listeners do any blogging at all, but even if you were to blog, say, once a month, to give some information about what you do and how you do save attorneys, time or money, and how you help them, to touch on different aspects of your services, say once a month in an article, is a really good way of, number one, educating your potential client. And I found this years ago, someone talked about the blog stood for Better Listings on Google. And a blog is a good way to do that, because you're adding content to the website on a regular basis. And then if you're addressing the particular issues that people are wanting information from, they might actually, when they're doing a Google search, land on your blog article. And then they can check out the rest of your website once they've read and gotten a feel for your expertise, because that's also what a blog is great for. It helps you to demonstrate your expertise so people can see that you are knowledgeable, you've got the background, you can really help them.
I have gotten cases from attorneys who have been searching on a particular medical issue and come across a blog that I wrote. Mm-hmm. And then contacted me and said, hey, you wrote about a case that's identical to the one that I have.
Wow.
I remember one was a guy who banged his knee up on a dashboard, and the blog was written on the request of one of my attorney clients who was having me look into what are the complications associated with an injury of that kind. Mm-hmm. So I wrote the blog, since all the research was fresh in my mind.
Right.
Attracted an attorney from another part of the country who hired me to work on his case.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've had the same experience too. And when I've written for my website, I had someone contact me, and she wound up being a great VIP client, because she said, that was exactly the problem I was having. And I was so impressed with the way you solved it. I just knew I had to work with you. So that's why it can be a really good benefit.
Well, on that happy note, Gloria, I thank you for being on the show. How can our listeners find out more about you and the services that you offer?
Well, the best way is to go to my website, which is gloriarand.com, and it's gloriarand.com, just in case you're listening rather than watching. And actually, if I may, I'd like to offer a free strategy session. So if anyone wants to, talk about what their website, how their website is doing, and we can maybe see about where I can give you some pointers on how we can make it work most effectively for you. You can find that by going to gloriarand.com/apply, APPLY, and you can apply to get that free strategy session with me.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Gloria. I've gotten some tips from today. I know that I'm going to be going back and looking at my title tags and descriptions on my website. I think you've focused on the importance of making sure your images are not too large so that you don't bloat down your website. Focus on your benefits of your services, not just a listing of your services alone.
Right.
Take a look at the material from the standpoint of a visitor coming to your website, and then recruit a visitor who will go through your website and give you feedback so that you can get somebody else's perspective. We all tend to lose objectivity, Gloria, about ourselves and what we've done.
Yep.
It's so easy for us to see what we thought we wanted to do rather than what's actually visible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if you're not sure about your benefits, talk to a client and use that client's word. That's a direct attorney speak.
Mm-hmm.
It will help you in getting another person's perspective on your material.
Yeah.
And I think you also emphasize, Gloria, the importance of blogging, which I do talk about in this podcast as well as in my other podcast, Writing to Get Business. Mm-hmm. Blogging brings visitors to your website, brings traffic. Mm-hmm. It's beneficial in so many ways. Absolutely. And it's an untapped resource for many legal nurse consultants.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a real good way for you to stand out from the crowd if you can start doing that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Gloria. And thank you to you, the listener, who has been part of us with this program. We appreciate your attention and the fact that you've spent some time with us today listening to Gloria Rand talking about SEO. This is Pat Iyer signing off.